In 1 Kings chapter 18, you have the drought that Elijah prayed at the direction of God would come on Israel, and that lasted 3.5 years. And then you have the contest with the prophets of Baal on top of Mount Carmel for which God could return rain, Baal or God. Elijah, we know that story. And Elijah prayed, let the God that answers by fire. The Lord answered, brought great rain. The drought was broken. In the next chapter, the 19th chapter, after that contest with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, and the slaying of the prophets of Baal by Elijah, Jezebel, the queen, wife of Ahab the king of Israel, sent a message to Elijah, this prophet of God who had just won an incredible victory, prayed the end of the drought, so forth. Anyway, Jezebel sends a message to Elijah, you're going to be dead within 24 hours, just like the prophets that you had killed, prophets of Baal. And at that news, Elijah seems to just fall apart. And I'll just quickly read a portion of it. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he'd killed all the prophets of Baal with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a message to Elijah saying, so may the gods do to me and even more, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. And he was afraid and arose, ran for his life, came to Beersheba, which is the southernmost point of Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, came and sat down under a juniper tree. And he requested for himself that he might die, and said, it is enough now, O Lord, take my life. I'm not better than my fathers. He lay down and slept under a juniper tree, and behold, there was an angel touching him and said to him, arise, eat. Then he looked, and behold, there was at his head a bread cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate, drank, lay down again. The angel of the Lord came again a second time, touched him and said, awake and eat, because the journey is too great for you. So he arose and ate and drank, and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God, or Mount Sinai. Now, there's just a couple things I want to quickly look at here. I think every one of us that are human will always find more than one place in life and time in life when, like Elijah, we are not sure we can even go on. Elijah was at the end of himself. He'd had it. And you notice that he had 3 specific symptoms, if you want to call it that. One was total physical exhaustion. He couldn't go any further. Second, he had real psychological disorientation, if you want to call it that. He was filled with fear. He had a completely exaggerated evaluation of the power of Jezebel, the threat, whether she could carry it out. And this is the same man that one day before had been not afraid to face the king of Israel, and he had all kinds of confidence. And so he was fearful, disproportionate view of the trouble. Another characteristic that he had, that we'll have in times like that, is a feeling of complete isolation. He felt, I'm the only one. There's nobody left. I don't have any friends. No one support me. I'm alone. And he also wished desperately to escape those circumstances, whatever they might be. So desperate that he told God, I'd like for you to just kill me. Now, I guess the only good thing, Elijah wasn't willing to commit suicide, but he was asking God to do it for him. And, please just get me out of this, even if it means killing me. That's the best way out. There's a couple of major symptoms of the kind of fatigue and exhaustion all of us can come to in our lives, depending on what we may go through, circumstances and so forth. Physical, psychological, and spiritual, just the bottom falls out. And there's much in the remedy that teaches us not only about the remedy, but also enlightens the problem. It helps us see that Elijah first needed physical rest, because that's the first thing God gave him. He sent an angel, and he said, listen, he needs rest, water, food. Often our psychological and even spiritual feelings and judgments and self-perception is affected by just physical exhaustion. We can really look often to that place as the first place to start to try to recover with God's grace and help. And so Elijah's problem physically was addressed. Then the second thing that's addressed, I think, is psychological and emotional. And for that, God enabled him, in the strength of that little bit of food, to get all the way to Mount Sinai. He ends up on the top of Mount Sinai, and he's there waiting on God. Maybe not even sure why he's there. But I think he had lost a sense of God's presence. He'd given up hope. So he stands there, and he does see a lot of sensational things, which it teaches us too, but we don't have time for it today. There was a great wind that split the rocks. There was a great fire. There was earthquake. There was all kinds of stuff. And every time these supernatural and sensational things occurred, it says, but God wasn't in that. Then Elijah said, he heard a still, small voice, a whisper, other versions will say. And at that he knew, that's God. God's talking to my heart, which reminds us, God's not into the sensational and the spectacular. It's the still, small voice. But it restored to Elijah, God's still here. He's still talking to me. He's not in the clamor and the loudness and the noise. But when I'm quiet, I can hear his voice. And that was an encouragement and a restoration of the sense of God's presence. And then also, God helped him psychologically by giving him a new assignment. He said, I want you to go to, you get Elisha, and you anoint him to eventually be prophet in your place, and you mentor him and you teach him. And so also he gave him some instructions with some of the other nations, go anoint different guy king. All of it was, God gave him some new tasks and new jobs. That sometimes is what we need. But third, then with the spiritual discernment of God's presence, helped him spiritually. And then as a little kind of an afterthought, God also corrected his inaccurate judgment, because he kept repeating this, Lord, there's no one left. I'm the only prophet you got. Everybody else has abandoned God. I'm all alone. There's no hope. And God then, just lastly, not as an afterthought, because God never forgets anything, but it almost seems like it. He says, by the way, after you go get Elisha and you go anoint these other kings, I want to remind you something. Tell you something you don't know. There's still 7,000 in the nation of Israel that love God. You're not alone. You're not all by yourself. There's still some believers that are holding fast. I think those kinds of things are what we need to be reminded of in days like today. We're exhausted spiritually, emotionally, in some cases even physically. Our world is insane. It's like a fire hose every time we watch the news of bad news. Everything is just overwhelming. And it's easy to feel like I just have had it. And we feel we're the only people that believe anything anymore. All the old paths and all the old truths are gone. There's no hope. There's no help. We need sometimes physical rejuvenation. We need emotional relaxation and restoration. And then that will help us with spiritual revival in our own hearts, and an enlightenment that, you know what, things aren't as bad as I thought. I'm not the only one. So God's help is with us no matter if we think, I can't go on another step. We can. Father in heaven, you're good to us. You understand the weakness of our fallen bodies and minds, and you're able to restore us and help us. Help us seek you in especially days like this when we feel like we've just about had it. In your name, amen.